1992 and has been teaching at the college level for over 35 years. Father's Children, her first novel, is the result of the inspiration of her parents, her interest in history, and her belief that young people must understand the past in order to forge a better future. Renée is an animal lover, an avid walker, and educator who seeks to empower her students, and most of all, a proud mother of two wonderful children. Welcome, Renée.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. I want to thank you for the privilege of speaking to you about this special milestone in my life, which is the publication of my first novel, Father's Children. Thanks a lot. Okay. I have taught literature and writing skills for over 35 years at the college level. I'm really getting old. And I have written academic articles and, of course, a research dissertation for my PhD, but writing fiction, historical fiction, is quite different. Now, my colleagues would verify or would testify to the fact that students nowadays refer to everything as a story, and it drives teachers of English quite crazy because they will say that poems are a story, short stories are a story, the novel is a story, what they watch on television is a story, what they see on TikTok is a story, everything is a story. And there exists in their minds absolutely no differentiation between genre. And yet, I was thinking about it, in some ways, they're absolutely right. Art, all arts, the literature included, is of course born of a story, a personal story. And my novel, Father's Children, is a very personal story. But like all stories, it does not occur in a vacuum. There is always a distinct social, historical, cultural, and psychological backdrop to each and every story. There is some hurt, some pain, some injustice, some loss, which each writer and every writer has to work through. And that, my friends, is the genesis of a novel. That is how a novel is written. And certainly it is the genesis of my novel, Father's Children. I'm going to take you back in time. It was summer, probably the end of July, because I was getting quite anxious to go to grade 3. I was on vacation from school, and I loved school. So having completed the 2nd grade, as I say, I was waiting very eagerly for 3rd grade and to meet my new teachers. I recall one evening greeting my father at the door, and he said that he had something for me. I saw that he was holding a book. Nothing unusual there, because he often came home with books for me. In fact, I always used to give him the title of the Nancy Lee mystery story. You all probably remember that. And I have the entire collection in my basement. Okay, and he would always buy me another one, which I would read in an hour, and he'd, oh, I gotta go get another one. Okay, but this book that he was holding was different, and I saw that it wasn't a Nancy Lee. He handed me this volume, and it had a very disturbing cover on it. One word, one title was written, and it was written in bold black letters, and it said Treblinka. And this word, Treblinka, is sort of written on top of the photo of a boy, who I would say was probably around 11 or 12 years of age. And the photo disturbed me so much. I'm still recalling, even now, thinking of it. The face was emaciated. The face was white. It was the face, almost the picture of a ghost, with large, brown, pained eyes staring at it. It was the face of a victim. I realize that now. It was a once human child who had been stripped down, dehumanized. And I remember feeling very upset when I saw it. Embarrassed, it's very difficult to explain. I felt vulnerable, in fact, almost naked, if you can imagine. naked and embarrassed that a child could be made to look like that. And then I remember I looked up at my late father and he said, in a very matter-of-fact, calm, resolute way, because that's the way he always spoke, he said the following: "You will write the tragedy of our people one day." My late dad had charged me with the mission. As I say, one might argue that this is not an appropriate or typical request to make of a 7 or 8-year-old child. But then again, my late dad was not a typical man. And I remember that I embraced that vision and that mission wholeheartedly, enthusiastically. In that instant, I knew that I had been given a solemn trust to fulfill. Now, did that mission, that trust which my dad had placed on me, did it stay? Absolutely. Now, obviously, I did not think of it 24 hours, 7 days a week, at least not consciously. But what I had to do was always there. It is in me. It was there when I studied at school. It was there when I played. It was there when I entered competitions, and I entered absolutely every academic competition I could. And being second was never an option. I was always striving to be the first. I had to do something with my life. It was there when my father asked and expected of me. It was there when I attended Wager High School. I graduated from Wager. It was there when I attended McGill as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student. It was there when I honored and majored and studied literature and history, particularly the literature and history of the late 19th century, early 20th century Europe. The Europe in which the Holocaust was conceived, in which it was articulated, and in which it was executed. And this mission, what my father asked of me or told me to do, to give voice to the voiceless, it was there and it remains part of me, even in my professional life, in teaching young people to know the madness and hatreds of the past, so as to avoid them, hopefully, in the future, or even in the present, sadly. Now, how does a writer transform a personal hurt, a painful story, into a work of historical fiction? You can say that I grew up with history all around me, because my parents always spoke about historical events. And as you will see, I couldn't put it up on a screen, but the screen is not cooperating, it's not in the right place. So we made photocopies, and you'll see that my late father's life was very connected to history. He was born in 1904 in Radom, Poland. Radom was about 90 kilometers southwest of Warsaw. He was born when Edward VII was the monarch. Who remembers Edward VII? And his lifespan spanned 5 British monarchs. He was 8 years old when the Titanic sank, and he was 1912, and he would speak about, the news rippling through and the talk on the street as everybody was astonished at the sinking of the Titanic. He lived this. He witnessed the first car in 1910. He was a little 6-year-old, and he would speak almost playfully and still defiantly how he had snuck out of the house to see this incredible invention, a car, the first car coming through the streets of Radom. And this was quite amazing, given the fact that at the age of 100, my son and daughter were teaching him how to use the internet, which he loved, because he would read the Jerusalem Post online. So his life, he had a tremendous span. As you see also, he lived through 16 US presidents, 2 world wars. In 1948, the reestablishment of the state of Israel, and I think it's very important that we know that it's the re-establishment of the state. And as I was telling students this morning, Canada, and we know nothing about the history of Canada or anything else, I might add, Canada wasn't even the country that we know, because
Saskatchewan and Alberta only came into the Confederation in 1905, after my father was born. And of course, Newfoundland in 1949 and Nunavut in 1998. So as I say, there was history always around us when we were growing up. And my parents would recount many adventures, many exploits of their life before the war and after the war. Okay, so history was all around me. Yet personal narratives and insights are insufficient. The personal must be wedded with historical fact, with objective data. Fortunately, research, especially historical research, is the stuff of my life. I would read and research everything about the war, the environment in Europe, the intellectual climate. I was very curious about the ideological underpinnings of fascism and the other political ideologies. I was interested in the military, the economic, the historical, and the cultural aspects of Europe at this time. And I would keep notes, again, something which college and university students really don't know how to do. But I would keep notes about everything. And as I always tell my students now, when you're reading something, underline what is important so that you will remember it and be able to come back to it. I also researched and looked at maps. Okay, again, something most young people nowadays don't even know what the world looks like, and you have to tell them to take out a map and wow, oh, there's France or Belgium. Yeah, here's where it is, or here's the Middle East or whatever. So maps are very important. And I would also seek out primary material, find firsthand accounts of survivors or veterans even. People who had been there in Europe, who had seen the fighting, who had met Germans and others who possibly had been at the liberation of the camps. So primary material is very important, especially in this day and age of Holocaust denial. So over and above the accounts of my father, my research was extensive and it continues even today. I want to mention two important points. In my many years of research, of seeking and organizing and compiling relevant, objective, or verifiable data, I really came to admire my late father's memory, which was absolutely incredible. His recall of facts, distances, statistics, the evolution and timeline of events was amazing. For instance, my son once asked him about the size of the Jewish population in Radom on the eve of the Nazi invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939. My father was sitting in the living room, he sort of paused for a second, and then he replied, there must have been around 26,000 Jews. And sure enough, verifying this for the writing of the novel, the population as listed in the government of Poland official documentation, which is available online, and also the archives at Yad Vashem, Jerusalem, Israel, was set at 26,800 inhabitants. So my father was off by 800 people, to which my son said, you know what, Zadie's also a demographer. Similarly, when my late dad would speak of walking from point A to point B, for example, he said he walked from Lvov, which is now within the Ukraine, to Brest, or Brest-Litovsk on the Polish-Russian border, and walking the forests in between, his recollections would be accurate to about 3 to 5 kilometers. More importantly, though, the writing of fiction requires imagination. One must be able to put oneself in the place and the person of one's characters. And this aspect of writing is actually most liberating and most exciting. Because again, all my life I've done academic writing, analysis, dissertations, and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I was able to create people. For example, one of my characters is a Polish woman who's employed in the Formansky household. And many of my readers have emailed me that they really like Yasminska. They're moved by her. I have one reader, a woman in Britain, who contacted me. And she told me that her mascara wouldn't stop running because of the tragic outcome of Yasminska's misplaced life. And the character of Yasminska, I hope you will read the novel, but you will see that she basically is a very good woman, very plain woman, who unfortunately does not pick her men well. Her first boyfriend brutalizes her, she loses the baby. And the second man whom she loves, quite the charmer, very narcissistic character. She loves and adores him. And unfortunately, not only does he cheat on her, but he then joins the Polish auxiliaries helping the Nazis. He wears a swastika and in general is nothing but a cheat. And she ultimately is destroyed by her relationship with Zbigniew. Now, how did I build or create the character of Yasminska? Well, I had the general idea of her in my head, but in terms of her experiences in the novel, how did I put flesh on the idea? Well, I actually began to live as Yasminska. I sort of entered her mind, her heart. There were times when I would be in my kitchen preparing food or else driving back and forth to Banyan where I teach, and I sort of would be thinking, what is Yasminska doing at this time? And also, what is she feeling? Similarly, my imagination was activated to the point that I became my grandfather, the character of Jacob Bernansky. And I would look at the photo of his neck. We have one photo of him. Now, that was all that was left. Of course, I never met him. How could I? Since he was murdered at Treblinka between August 6th and August 7th, 1942. That's all I know. That was the time when the Jews of Radom were taken away. And by the end of the day, August 7th, 1942, they had been dispatched or dealt with, as the Germans would say. But yes, I became him because an author must be able to place himself or herself in the character. And so I would sometimes go into the living room, quite often, I would just look at this picture. And I tried to imagine a man. I looked at him and I saw that he had dignity, that there was a twinkle in his eye, which still remains in that photo. And I tried to think of how this man and others like him were being ground down, how they were being reduced by hunger, by pain, by confusion, by isolation, while all the time trying to protect his family and maintain human dignity, all in the face of Nazi brutality. The third ingredient, which I discovered, which is necessary to the writing of historical fiction, is an author's desire to question why. When I was writing, I realized that I had to probe, why do people and why do my characters behave in certain ways? Why do events unfold the way they do? And in asking why, I had been trained, either consciously or unconsciously, again, by the best, my late dad. He always asked why. He never accepted things just given a superficial explanation. He always looked beneath the surface or between the lines, as he would say. Now, the story or plot line of the novel was developed along parallel lines. We have the young Hein Bernansky, who is based on my dad, and the young Paul Boehmer, who in fact was Paul Buchner. Now, this Paul Buchner had been my father's friend, confidant, bosom buddy. They had played together, dreamed together, fooled around together like young people do. They had done all the things that young friends do together. Paul Buchner's father had been taken in as a partner in the large cannery in Radom that belonged to my grandfather. Because those of you who have roots back in Poland, in Lodz, or any one of the cities would know that leather was a very big material product that was produced, and Radom was the center of that. Now, the Buchner family had been taken in as partners. Hundreds of times, my late father would recall how this Paul, the son, who was his age, would sit across him from the Shabbat table. That was Paul's place, across from my father. And Buchners, or the Bomers in the novel, were Volksdeutschen. In other words, ethnic Germans, because Germans lived in different countries. They were calling in Germany, okay? Now, despite the partnership, despite the friendship, despite the warm relationships, Paul Buchner, or Boehmer, embraced fascism with alarming enthusiasm. And my father learned about this after the war. It was the ultimate betrayal, unpardonable, unfathomable. Now, my late dad was obviously pained by this all his life, but he was a very intellectual man, so he wasn't only pained and he wasn't angry, but he was curious. He was piqued by it. And he would always ask and wonder, what makes a young, intelligent, spirited person, as he remembered Paul to be, embrace a radical, hateful ideology? And of course, unfortunately, the question why pertains to what is going on in the world today as well, too. So building or creating the character of Paul Boehmer was actually the most fascinating aspect of writing the entire novel. Because you see, Paul doesn't start out as evil. He doesn't start out, he's not born a Nazi. Because really, we're not born anything, are we? But he becomes one. And again, why and how? So I had to ask why at every step in my creation of this character. What is it about a young, spirited, intelligent person who is raised with proper values? My late father would remember his father spoke of this gentleman as, being a very decent, German, very civilized man. So what makes somebody who's born, and raised properly, what makes him become a cruel, bloodthirsty, hate-filled individual? How and why do some people develop a bloodlust? And this was a question which I can still have to ask, which my late father asked all his life. So this process, the transformation in the character of Paul Boehmer, was really most fascinating to me as I wrote the novel, and I actually think this is one of the strongest points in my writing. Was it, or is it people's need to rebel against their fathers? In other words, against their traditional family values? After all, not every German father wanted his son to grow up and become a killer, okay? So how does this happen? Or does the answer lie in the fact that some people are just very weak and they have such a need for validation, such a craving for acceptance from a peer group that they join along, they join gangbangers or cults or radical groups or whatever. They'll join, even if that means becoming brutes and killers. And sadly, I can draw many analogies with the events that we've been witnessing on college campuses across North America and Europe. Okay, and as commentators in this belief have been remarking, these young people, they're privileged, they're entitled, they attend some of the best schools in the world. They have a bright future ahead of them. The world could be good, but they believe everything they're told. They lack critical thinking, very skill they're supposed to be learning. And perhaps in the end, young people like this crave the sort of family validation which is given to them by hate groups and other kinds of gangs. And the Nazis understood this because they had a term which was called Blutschaft, brotherhood. And the character of Paul Boehmer, the character whom I created, bit by bit is seduced by this notion of Blutschaft. He begins to like fitting into the group, and he disavows his family and his past values. Finally, there is one further element or step in the process of writing fiction. And perhaps this final element is really the most important ingredient. It is tenacity, an absolute belief or confidence that what you have to say is really important to say. Now, in the years that I worked on the novel, were there times when I asked myself if anyone really cares? You know, the story was, and it is important to me, does anybody else care? Does anyone still care to learn about World War II? Does the world want to keep talking about the Holocaust? Or indeed acknowledge the death, the brutalization of millions and millions? Especially since we live in a society where everybody likes and wants immediate sort of satisfaction. Okay? So, does anyone care? And should I go ahead and work on it and publish it? Well, I'm going to tell you frankly that whenever these questions came to my mind, I dismissed them within a second or two. So convinced was I that the story had to be written. Or perhaps it is just simply that I am arrogant enough to believe that the story is important to everyone. The words of my late father ring loud and clear in my ears, in my being, because he used to say time and again, not only was this a war against the Jewish people, but it was a war against civilization itself. And sadly, we're hearing that now, very recently. Again, to put it in his words, he used to say that the Nazis were about to turn the clock back, and he would actually do this, destroy and undo thousands of years of civilization. That's what they stood for. We stand for something else. So I believed that yes, this book has to be published. One other encounter reinforced my absolute conviction that Father's Children had to be published. 4 years ago, just before the COVID epidemic shut everything down, I attended a lecture and encountered Roberta Grossman. The lecture was at the Beth Israel Beth Aaron Synagogue, and of course it was hosted by Rabbi Kuko. Roberta is a native Canadian born in Toronto. She now resides in Los Angeles and works as a film producer with Nancy Spielberg, sister of Steven Spielberg. I wish I had a famous brother like that. My brother's here, so I'm now he's a good brother. He's not Steven Spielberg, but he's a good brother. Okay. Now the Spielbergs have funded the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. They don't want the memory and the challenges, the brutality to be forgotten. So they do fund the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. Now, I was able to talk with Roberta, which took a little bit of doing, I assure you. And of course, I ran this past her. I mentioned my novel, and I asked her if she thought that there was a market for another Holocaust novel. Does anyone care? Is another Holocaust novel warranted? She looked at me and she answered in the following way. She said, there were 6 million stories, and there have not yet been 6 million novels. So she was telling me, go ahead. She was reinforcing what I knew. So to recap, the writing of historical fiction really requires 4 elements. The first, of course, is a personal story. Some event or insight of supreme importance. Some pain, okay, that is so great, okay, that you really must explore it, process it, work through it, so that it gives meaning and purpose to your life and hopefully to others, your readers. The second element or ingredient is in the writing of fiction, is research. There's always a context to events. Things don't happen in a vacuum. So the better the research, the more you learn about your topic, the better your writing, obviously. An author is like a painter, like an artist. You're filling in a canvas, a backdrop. And the more information you have, the more you have learned about something, then your canvas will be brighter in color and richer in detail. The third element needed for the writing of historical fiction is obviously imagination. One must be able to leave oneself, to become your character. You must imagine not only what they look like or what they are saying, but you have to be able to imagine what they're eating, how it tastes, how they move, how they're combing their hair, how they're polishing their boots. Again, this character is the big new, who is such a narcissist, really loves the way the Germans have polished their boots. And it says at one point, that's probably why the Poles have lost the war. We don't polish our boots the way the Nazis do. And most of all, you have to be able to imagine what their hearts are whispering to them. Finally, the writing of fiction, as I said, requires a tenacious belief in your message. You have to be devoted with capital D. The starting point, the ground zero, if you will, must live in you. I think that the famous American writer, William Faulkner, was alluding to this when he was talking about writers, and he was saying that an author is always reliving his or her past. And he went on to say, the past is not dead. In fact, it isn't even past. The amazing, wonderful, and exciting thing about writing historical fiction is that your characters, their accomplishments, their weaknesses, their stupidities, their heroism, their insights live. You can make them live. And so keeping this in mind, I'm going to conclude this lecture by reading the last two paragraphs of Father's Children. These last paragraphs reflect and summarize the letter, the vision of the main character, Hein Permansky, who is in fact based on my late amazing heroic father. So please bear with me as I read this to you. An amazing 140 years were given to Hein Permansky, an incredible life comprised of so many journeys. Mind sharp and always physically active, Hein often contemplated the many times that he had cheated death. He would also ponder the nature of man. What had happened to Paul Boehmer and the other Pauls? How had hatred grown to such despicable madness in the Europe of his youth? And when his last days were upon him, when his final hours were slipping away, and his grief-stricken children and grandchildren were gathered close around him, Hein's calm, matter-of-fact fearlessness was still apparent. Propped in bed, he would doze, but then awaken. His blue eyes, those eyes which had seen and known all manner of things, were still bright, keen, even somewhat playful. And he would whisper to his children. He did whisper this to me. Don't be sad. No one can remain here forever. You must accept that. But don't mourn for me. I have been an unbelievably lucky man. I have lived many lives. I have no regrets. I have been warned and sustained by your love, by your accomplishments. I did what I had to do. He was right, of course. As usual, Hein Permansky was right. He had lived so many lives, played so many roles, inspired so many by the example of his own compelling tenacity. Pitiful motherless infant, rebel son, youthful political idealist, reluctant orator, faithful friend, unyielding foe, husband, father, and grandfather. It was in these last roles that Hein Permansky excelled. No wonder in his final moments, he continued to worry about the security and well-being of his children, and the children of Israel, and indeed, the children of all the righteous of the world, because that is what a father must do. If you have any questions, I would love to take them to address them. Yeah.
I have a question. What is the language that was spoken in the poem?
Yiddish was my